I say. So who should start? I mean, let's just okay. Maybe each of us should just say a few words about this. Like why like what's the connection between Jane Austen and economics, and then we would let our other people in the call also share their perspective. So
Mhm.
for my part, I mean, when I think, I mean, I'm an economist, and I also very much like Jane. I mean, I'm a kind of a Janeite, in a good sense, and and when I think about what economics is all about, is one thing it's about is people maximize, so they try to get the best out of any situation, but equally importantly, there is an equilibrium out there. So not only one person maximizes, but like everyone is doing that. So there's going to be some kind of interaction, and you're not going to get all what you want. Like uh, so, and when I think about Jane Austen's novels, it's so often, especially well the women and the men too, but especially mothers, right? They're like Mrs. Bennet and others, who they want the best man for their daughters, and of course not every one of them can get it, and so they're gonna be an equilibrium. They're gonna be some kind of a sorting, and it's beautifully played out, I think, in her novels, like how it's being accomplished. There are, I think, differences between the novels. So some of the novels are more, so to speak, romantic, in that sense that the matching may not be easily uh, forecasted just by using economic models. But there are a couple of novels where it is, I think, easier. Anyway, so I will have a lot more to say about this, but I will just hand it over to you, Natasha and Rohit. So please share your perspectives on why you are excited hosting this podcast.
Yeah. Well, I first read all of Jane Austen novels with my father when I was 10. And I had the benefit of him being a scholar in 18th and 19th century British literature. So it was a very formative experience of my youth. Jane Austen became the voice of my conscience. And Peter, while I agreed with so much of what you said about maximization, and I'm particularly interested in how the their the female characters are maximizing for total status in the broadest sense in a mate, including not just, fortune and,
Yeah.
social standing, but love and character, affect, manners, all of these things. And it's really interesting because when uh, when you go through each of the novels, you can almost mathematically um, rate these various dimensions, characteristics, and that in my most recent reading of Jane Austen is exactly what I've been doing. So I've done five of what will be a total of seven, um, I guess, newsletters through Substack on what I've been calling Austen math, which is literally, the maximization process that you were talking about, Peter, applied through four dimensions to her single men. So I've, while Austen has been a presence in my life basically as long as I can remember clearly, this the level to which she is a maximizer and an economist, I am newly appreciating and pretty obsessed with.
Yeah, I mean, you now have the human capital to appreciate it. I mean, when you were a child,
Yeah, right,
you are not a
right.
like are you either you're a financial analyst or something like that, right?
Well, I my
I'm
day
sorry if I yeah,
by
but
day I'm a pricing strategist, yes, for a big
okay,
consulting firm. So I do some stuff that's relevant, yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I think I read Jane Austen first when I was in my late teens, and I wasn't yet a fully formed economist then. So first I also did not appreciate to the fullest extent her economic insights. But then when I started rereading the novels, that oh wow, it's such a there's so many beautiful sentences. I will quote a couple of it because some of which I'm very fond of, which kind of express economic wisdom, what I call economic wisdom. And
Right.
okay, so it was great to hear your inspiration. I loved your blog post, by the way. So all everyone around here listening to this, please read Natasha's Substack, and she has really, really good posts about ranking Jane Austen characters in terms of, and it's very important. I would say I always stress that to my students that maximization is not just about money. So it's not just about material possessions. It's also about social status. It's also about love. It's also about having good character. Uh, just whatever goals you have and achieving those goals. And so Natasha is doing a great job in those Substack posts, in kind of detailing like how Jane Austen thinks about ranking the characters, or like how Jane Austen thinks about what a good match, or who a good match is, like who is a good marriage partner, like what a good marriage partner consists of. And it's not just money, it's not just looks, it's not just status, but it's a mixture, a weighted mixture, at least according to Natasha. And maybe she'll talk a little bit more about it later on. So please, everyone, read those blog posts. They are really, really interesting and fun. Um, okay, so Rohit, how about you? Like we two are very much fans of Jane Austen. You did write about Shakespeare and economics before,
Uh,
right?
I did. I wrote one or for Henry because I thought his audience would appreciate it a little bit more than sort of mine. Um, Jane Austen. I mean, I first read her, I think somewhere between the ages when you two guys read, like early teens is from what I remember. At which point, sort of, um, I grew up in India and we had a stack of all sorts of novels that sat around that sort of my parents had read at their sort of, throughout their life. And a variety of them became the things that sort of I read because they were lying around, right? I mean, that's how I ended up sort of reading her. And I had a similar experience to kind of what you were talking about, Peter, in the sense that some of them were very different when I read them 10 years later or 20 years later. They're surprisingly nuanced. I think there's an interesting observation of a class of novels, of which Austen is probably, one of the top, if not the top, depending on how you ask, where the economic realities of life are take center stage in the novels, as opposed to them being, you know, happenstance that sits around
Right.
it. I think, whatever, just right from the get-go, from the opening lines of like Pride and Prejudice, it talks about it's a very market-based view of a large part of human life. And I like that. I think that was interesting to me. I mean, by education, I started out as an engineer, and then I really liked economics, which is why I went and got a degree in it. Even though sort of after that, I worked primarily in technology related fields. Um, and the fact that like economics as a lens kind of has a lot to teach us is something that I am intrinsically biased to, and I think Austen does a remarkably good job of that compared to a pretty much most contemporary novelists and even many of the novelists in her time. The one that you talked about, Peter, I had a similar analysis or view of Shakespeare, who does the same thing. And in some ways, I'm not entirely sure whether this is a function of the fact that some of the economic realities of life were easier to grasp with economic concepts in you know, a few centuries ago, or is it the fact that they just had a keen eye for certain facts of life and could present them in a way that doesn't necessarily distort their impact uh, by an enormous array of complex factors, which usually kind of twists and turns these things. So combine all of them together, whether it's from the, you know, marriage market perspective, whether it's extremely quantitative, her novels, which is, something I only appreciated afterwards, which is not quite, I don't know, it doesn't seem normal these days, right? I mean, if you read any of the modern novels, it's very rare that they are very exact in terms of sort of incomes and prospects and how that should actually be viewed in terms of the social realities. And put all of that together, whether it's, we talked about Pride and Prejudice, whether it's Mansfield Park, any of the other one, like I think she has a very clean view of that. And I always appreciated it, which means, the Salon kind of brings some of that together.
Yeah, it
Yeah, I
drives
mean,
the plot from the first page of stuff. Like, I mean, first page of first published novel, Sense and Sensibility. You have a male, a seat holder, right, of a
Right.
big manor house dying, and an issue of primogeniture and who is going to inherit. You have, all of these entail dynamics. And I think this goes to what you're saying, Rohit, around like how, what's going on that this seems to be more prevalent in, Austen's, Shakespeare's time is, I think there's a couple things going on. One of which the two of you are definitely better equipped to speak to than I am, which is my understanding of annuity dynamics in this period of the early 19th century was that they were pretty stable. And so, there's a way in which I think Austen would have had the expectation of her readers understanding what a specific dollar amount of money meant in ways that I will say, as a novelist, you kind of want to shy away from and get at through other means so that your book doesn't age itself, even if it is a part of the
right.
time. Part of the reason that we understand what Austen means in these has to do with that, and because she became so famous, so that there's all these people studying, that 10,000 a year is like mega, mega, mega bucks. And, a normal clergyman who has like a nice living has 700 pounds a year. And, and these things that you start, the more Austen you read, you start understanding as soon as Austen says so and so had 2,000 a year, so Rushworth had 12,000 a year. Your mind makes all of these connections to what that means from a status perspective, what that means from a meritability perspective, right?
Yeah, and what you mentioned on annuities, and one of my favorite lines from Jane Austen. Like, let me quote it
Please,
exactly.
please.
Like, this is oh, by the way, I forgot to bring my Sense and Sensibilities. Just a moment ago. I'll get it.
I'm just looking at the chat, and at some point, Anna, you're going to have to tell us what you mean
Yes.
by Austen cheats, but we'll let Peter get
Yes.
his copy of Sense and Sensibility first.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this is so this is a conversation between, I think it is John Dashwood and his wife, uh,
Fanny.
Fanny. Yeah, Fanny Dashwood. And so let me. So this is So it's about giving an annuity to I think the mother of John Dashwood, as far as I remember, and so to be sure, said she, sorry, so Fanny, it's better than parting with £1,500 at once. But then, if Mrs. Dashwood should live 15 years, we shall be completely taken in. 15 years, my dear Fanny, her life cannot be worth half that purchase. Certainly not. But if you observe, people always live forever when there is an annuity to be paid to them. And that's like one of my favorite lines from Austen. Like the reason is because as an economist, sometimes I teach my student, like I'll ask my student, like, what is the annuity insurance insures you against? And the answer is it assures you against a long life, because that's the risk of, like, that's a good risk, right? And so if you live longer, you get the annuity, because otherwise you wouldn't be having like active earnings, so you need something to live on when you are old. And so it's the risk of old age which really which an annuity protects you against. And of course it comes with a moral hazard, right? The moral hazard is that the one who is the annuity is paid to has a greater incentive to continue to live. And that, I mean, it's so amazing that Jane Austen in the early 19th century, like a very economics was not a thing then. It was an early days, and economists just didn't grasp this sort of insights except for Adam Smith, because Adam Smith really grasped almost everything. But the rest of them not really. And Austen kind of understanding these dynamics, it's so fascinating to me. And it wasn't at first when I read these novels, but when I read it for a second or a third time, that became to me very, very like compelling.
Well, one of my standard lines about Sense and Sensibility now is that the novel just hits different after 5 and 30. Because she was making all of those jokes at Colonel Brandon's
Oh yeah,
ancient expense at 35, and man, that doesn't seem that old anymore, but it really did seem very, very old, when you read it as a preteen or a teen.
yeah. I mean, I remember I reread the last time Sense and Sensibility, I think 2 years ago, and I was exactly 36 years old. I believe Colonel Brandon was about that age in the novel as well. So
Yeah,
yeah, it hit
exactly.
differently.
Do you guys think, when you think about her novels and her contemporaries who kind of looked at similar situations and issues around the same time, I keep wondering how much of the stuff that she's talking about was kind of in the water, so to speak, whether it's in terms, because if you think about the economy or like life, political economy at that point in time, certain issues like the annuity issue is a perfect example. There were, plenty of families who kind of had to rely on that to survive, which kind of brings it up as a clear example of something that novels should talk about because it's about the
Mhm.
current social reality, right? And I
Hmm.
think about, it's not necessarily sort of direct contemporaries, but if I think about the novels that I like that span the time period, sort of 19th century and before, a lot of them seem to have something similar. Like, Dickens had a very clear view of certain parts of life that he wanted to talk about. If you go way back, Shakespeare had a very clear view of what he wanted to talk about. Like, I think they spoke about the social realities quite a lot, and it kind of was brought to life in the novels, in the specific characters change, the game theory of figuring out who you want to marry, if you want to think about it that way, the optimization algorithms, the satisficing from the amount of money that would have been good enough, not for you, but for everybody else. I think about sort of how much of that was in the water as an interesting analysis tool.
I think a lot of it was in the water in terms of marriage. In terms of some of the like the connections of her, microeconomic and home economic and succession of estates world, which, of course she's so directly steeped in. I think it's a broader question. One of the readings that was put in for the salon was on like, did Austen read Smith? Like, how much did she, how familiar was she with his works? But I think in terms of like her direct observation with marriage, you hear it the way that her characters speak to each other, and I mean, like a lot of the things that Austen's characters say to each other would be totally taboo about money now, because marriage was socially a such a transaction. And you
Hmm.
see this too, not just in the novels, but in like Austen's letters to Cassandra. A reader alerted me to an amazing letter that she wrote to Cassandra, her sister, at one point that, was something along the lines of like, it's so rare to come across a man who, whose character matches his, intellect matches, and is obviously she's much more eloquent than I am, but and all of these positive characteristics, and then even say you find that special someone and then you may meet such a person, one among a thousand, I think she says, but they might not be the firstborn son of an earl. And like the extent to which marriage was transactional and women were making an economic decision really, really, if not first and foremost, because I think that I do believe that Jane Austen ranks moral considerations above economics. But I think that's the only thing that she ranks
Mhm.
above fortune and the economic circumstances of a marital union.
Yeah, let's not forget that in those days, married women couldn't own property. So whatever they uh, acquired during the marriage and before the marriage, by the way. So like everything became the property of their husband. So for a woman, it was vitally important in those days, especially. I mean, even like today, it's not different exactly. Like people still value money, right, and status. But in those days, it was just vitally important for a woman to get a marriage partner who is wealthy. And I think, and the other thing is, we did have a kind of a phase after Jane Austen with the advent of romanticism, where
Hmm.
this type of considerations were kind of pushed to the background and became kind of icky to talk about these. But I
Hmm.
think nowadays we again probably are a bit more comfortable talking about like how like matching somewhat in terms of economics. Like that's my view, at least, that nowadays we are again becoming, I think, more comfortable,
Hmm.
especially with the advent of online dating platforms and so on. They are so openly uh, like economistic, like it's so openly about um, getting optimal matches that you just can't avoid talking about courtship and marriage in economic terms. And I think that's probably one reason why a lot of people relate to Jane Austen today. I mean, even more than they did in the, I don't know, late Victorian period, when like sentimentalism rode high, and like talking about money was not something which people felt comfortable when talking about romance. But I think that now probably we're kind of returning back in terms of that. Yeah, it's so. And the other thing is, and I think Rohit mentioned this also, that it's so Jane Austen's novels talk about matching in very much quantitative terms. So it's not just qualitative, like he has a lot of money or he has a good
Mhm.
character. Like how much income does he or she has? And I remember I once went to, but I was in Bath and I visited the Jane Austen Museum, and they had a poster where they listed like they talked about like what £10,000 meant in those days and all that stuff, and who had what, how much money. And I think you get the full picture if you read all or most of the novels, because if you read just one of
Mhm.
the novels, you're a bit
Hmm.
lost, right? Like how much money is £10,000. But when you read all the novels and you put these into perspective, and then you get the full picture of who were really the big guys in this game.
Hmm. Hmm. You know what's interesting on that though, because you mentioned sometimes she's a little bit selective. Like she doesn't always give the income, and sometimes she gives one side and not the other. In in some of her earlier and shorter novels, it is usually the men. Like we know that Colonel Brandon has 2,000 a year. We know that Willoughby has like 600 or 700. We learn, of course, Mr. Darcy's famous 10,000 a year, that Bingley has 4 or 5.
Hmm.
But by the time we get to Emma, she never gives Knightley's income. And we know very early on that Emma herself has this huge fortune of 30,000 pounds, which is really interesting to me. That, it almost seems like over the course of her career, and with Emma in particular, she's pushing the on the kind of the terms around which these things are discussed from a gender perspective. I don't want to take that too far, because there's always a danger to do an overly progressive reading. Jane Austen was conservative and very much a product of her
I mean,
times, right?
she was even probably a Tory, by the way.
Yeah,
So
no,
I mean,
that's what I'm saying. She
we know
absolutely,
about
yeah,
her family very
yeah.
much. Yeah.
She published as a lady, right? She was not like some progressive feminist, but I just do think she has these little subtle things in places, like why give Emma's income and not or her, it's not really her income, her fortune, and not Knightley's. Where she withheld versus where she gave, I think is really interesting, because it isn't totally consistent.
Yeah, although in Darcy's case, I believe Darcy's 10,000, that's a yearly income, right? That's an
Yeah, yeah,
income.
that's a
Yeah,
year,
it's
10
not
10,000 a
the
year.
fortune.
Yeah.
And that's also kind of nice that she very often gives us the income, which,
Hmm.
well, at the end of the day, that's what really matters, like the
Yeah.
flow. Because that's going to determine the stock at the end of the day.
Hmm.
And the
Well,
other,
but well,
yeah,
this is maybe a question for you in terms of the the period, because you guys maybe know more about this than I do, because I
I
feel like
know.
she often gives um, men's fortune in income in what they have a year. But when she talks about women's fortune, when she talks about Miss Grey and Sense and Sensibility, it's often in like the lump sum that is going to be transferred, almost like more of like a dowry type
Yeah.
one-time payment, right? So Miss Grey has 50,000, Emma has 30,000. Do you think that has to do with the marital dynamics of the husband getting all the money the second they're married?
I mean, I mean, I think absolutely, because the women's fortune was interesting for a man from a perspective of how much dowry he will get after the woman. The woman's income would not have been that much interesting, because after the woman married, any income that she might earn, and of course they didn't earn an income, but if she did earn an income, that the income would have become her husband's income. So
Yeah.
what was interesting is is I think the wealth, the fortune that the woman may have inherited, and then became the dowry. I mean, that's my take anyway.
Mhm.
And there's also like an economic reality to it, because um, women pre-marriage, if they were unmarried women, I think could own property,
Yeah,
but married women could not.
Mhm.
yeah,
So marriage effectively strips away a whole bunch of rights.
Yeah.
And if you think about the implications of that, what that means is that if you're married, widowed, whatever, you don't have property. So how does Darcy's income come, or anybody's income come? It comes from property somewhere, right? I mean,
Hmm.
income is because
yeah.
they own something,
Land often.
land usually,
Yeah.
correct?
Oh, there's
So
also
if you
like the law, right? And some of the professions.
it's legal, but like primarily these are aristocratic
Yeah.
kind of endeavors, or like they have some ongoing concern, usually
Yeah.
land that pays them the money. If you're a woman and you can't do that, then pretty much the only way that you can get it is through a settlement, or like, which is primarily lump sum. So
Hmm.
that kind of shows up in how you would actually imagine the women get the capital, so to speak, versus men. Because like they have this ongoing concern that goes till perpetuity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it is interesting, this it almost you go get into the legal designations, right? Because it was again, it wasn't always consistent. Sometimes the property is entailed, in other cases it doesn't seem like there is that, same restriction. Like it's painted as like a particularly cruel arrangement, for instance, in well, both Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice, but more so in Pride and Prejudice, I would say, because at least John Dashwood is their father's son, even if, from another marriage. Whereas like Mr. Collins is like some cousin. They don't even really know who it is. Not that Austen was particularly against first cousins marrying, but I don't get the sense that he's even like a first cousin. He's, I think, described as like a distant relative, and yet he, he's gonna inherit Longbourn.
Yeah, and this is why I think Emma is unique in some sense
Yes.
because she's unmarried and wealthy, which is not a um, combination that usually exists because it
Mhm.
means she has a lot more control over her life, right? She can forego marriage if she wanted to, she can delay it, etc., and that makes her dangerous in that world.
Well, and she talks
Yeah.
about it constantly, how she, how long it takes her to realize she wants to marry Mr. Knightley is in no small part the fact that she genuinely has a choice to not marry and be not just perfectly comfortable, but, really live in splendor, uh, if even if she, chooses to remain single. It's
Yeah,
super
because once you
unusual.
marry, it kind of goes away, and that kind of contrasts with, I guess, persuasion, where these things are in contrast, like the financial
Hmm.
security versus, you know, what she wants to do, what Anne wants to do, kind of are in contrast with each other.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, but the
Markets.
outside option matters a lot, especially in those days where you had kind of a competitive marriage market, but not like fully competitive, right? I mean, you couldn't choose among like hundreds of men or women, and so I like so and anyway, so talking about transferable utility might not have been also not have always been realistic in
Hmm.
those relationships, especially as social norms were often powerful in determining like how much of the surplus man or the woman gets from the marriage and so on. So how look, what your outside option was in terms of your income or wealth when single very much mattered, obviously. So, and that's beautifully illustrated in the novels. The other thing you talked about, Natasha, about Austen's feminism. I agree that. I mean, I don't think she should have been called a feminist, but when she was, uh, what she was, she very much stressed that women were just as much an active decision makers as men. So I have a again I wrote out a line from one of actually this line appears in at least two novels that I remember. And one is not the exact same line, but something along this line. So one was I believe Persuasion, and that was said by, uh, if I remember correctly, by the admiral's wife, but I'm not sure about that. So the line reads, "I hate to hear you talk about all women as if they were fine ladies instead of rational creatures." Now, that's again something which speaks strongly to an economist, right? Like, yeah, I mean, just this term rational creatures is like, again, economics was not a thing. They didn't think about, they didn't write, scholars even didn't write about like the rational people, rational choice, like, but that here it is in one of Jane Austen's novels. That this same line is like, is I think uttered if I remember correctly, in Mansfield Park, and I don't remember who says it, but it's also said. It's also said by one of the women. Um, Indeed, one of the older women, I think, maybe Mrs. Grant, but I'm not sure about that. And it's almost the same, that women aren't just fine ladies; that they are rational decision makers, and that, I think, to me means that there is a sort of an egalitarianism, but it is egalitarianism in the sense of that all persons, like men or women, they are they are into this. They are part of this game. Like they look out for opportunities. They try to choose the best options. They are not just passive. Uh, they are not passive. I mean, that to me is the key here.
I'm going to add a third one, which Henry Tilney says in Northanger Abbey, which isn't exactly alike, but I think is related. In every power of which taste is the foundation, excellence is pretty fairly divided between the sexes. So I think you're right, right? She understands that women are people, but that doesn't, at the same time, I don't think that, you know, that means that she's like a she's not a contemporary feminist, and
Yeah,
her
sure.
novels are not about slavery predominantly. And this is when I say that, like, that both the Janeites, and I'm going to object to you being a Janeite. I think you're an Austenite, not a Janeite, because I
Okay.
associate Janeite and Janeitism with something that Austen would not approve of, which is the use of her first name that way. She would want to be called, Miss Austen. I'm not going to do the Miss. I'm just going to treat her like any other. But there's a whole thing in Emma about Jane Fairfax being overly familiarized by Mrs. Elton, and how dare she call her Jane. Anyway, but so I think that the Janeites go overboard on the romantic angle, but the professors also go overboard on, like, the sociology angle, and write whole books about how Jane Austen's oeuvre is about the abolition of slavery because of
Yeah, they do that
three
very
lines.
they do that very one-sidedly. So
Hmm.
the Jane Austen basically mentions slavery very, I mean, kind of indirectly in Mansfield Park, for example.
Hmm.
But it's not like she's criticizing slavery. It's part of the picture. It's part of the uh, and I just can't understand, like, how you can paint Austen as someone who is, like, I don't know, advocating for this or that policies. I mean, because she's not doing any of that. She's just painting a picture of her society, and slavery is part of that picture. But she's not really dealing with the question. I don't know. Should we abolish slavery? I mean, that was just not her intention to me.
There is another line. I'm trying to remember which other novel, because it's not only in Mansfield Park. It does happen like one or two other places. But I mean, if we're talking about one plot point and, three lines, it's making a lot too much of it, in the same way that on the, in the other direction, putting like romance novel covers on Austen's novels is not an accurate sell either.
And I believe that what is not emphasized enough is the economics side, right? I mean, it's always Jane Austen, the progressive sociologist, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's how many professors paint her, and I believe it was uh, uh, who it was. Anyway, but someone pointed this out, that actually this line of her thought is not appreciated enough. That if she was a sociologist, she she was even more an economist,
Mhm.
and and also that she was not. If she was a sociologist, she was not an activist sociologist. She was not about when she criticizes her society or her characters. It's always a very fine balance between criticizing the social structures and criticizing the individuals. So both has its
Mhm.
place in her novels, I believe, but it's always done quite gently. It's not like let's do a revolution, let's change that. But it's like, well, these are these character flaws that people have, or many people have, and this is how their social surroundings might encourage or discourage character flaws and other character traits. And it's done in a very descriptive way that uh, I don't know. That's my reading anyway. That it's very to me. It's an overreach when you try to make Jane Austen into some kind of activist. Uh, but in fact, she was probably a Tory in her own time. I mean, for all we know about her. Um,
I mean, that would make sense. I think the one addition that I might make is that we talked about currency and stuff, but one interesting, she does think about um, virtue. And this is part of
Right.
why it kind of relates to Adam Smith's Moral Sentiments
yeah,
book,
Mhm.
which she, I mean, I would imagine she presumably was at least aware of, in the sense that like there is the theory of how intangible human capital affects social standing, which is interesting, right? Because like, I mean, it's not just about sort of the pure economics. In some sense, it makes sense that like the women had to be rational creatures because they were far more, it was far more important for them to
yeah.
make an informed,
Yeah.
rational choice because they had fewer degrees of freedom. So like you're forced to be rational in your decision making. Um, but at the same time, yeah, personal merit and sort of behavior does change how your market value is perceived in society. So it's not a pure quantitative ranking of incomes either, which is an interesting part
Absolutely.
of it.
I think that there nowhere I couldn't agree with you more, Rohit, and nowhere do we see this more than in what the high Austenian, like the high of high Austenian crimes is seduction. Seduction and abandonment. It is a virtue thing first and foremost, but it is also part of the virtue is tied to what is effectively just a total economic downfall, right? And you see it over and over and over again in her novels to, to different levels of disaster for different women. Like I don't think anyone would argue that Lydia Bennet comes off as badly as the woman that Willoughby abandons, before ever meeting Marianne. But and Maria Bertram, of course, at the end of Mansfield Park too, is kind of able to like just get out of the spotlight with her aunt, and she probably lives comfortably enough. So the penalties weren't always totally consistent, but the steepness of the fall is, right? Like Colonel Brandon's protege, the young woman who in Sense and Sensibility, who Willoughby abandons, is has less to begin with than Lydia Bennet, has less to begin with than Maria Bertram. So there's an extremely steep fall in all three cases. It's just they're falling from a different initial height.
Yeah, you talk about both. Rohit talks about how virtue is, and you talk also about human capital, and that is dear to my heart because in my own research, most of what I do is questions about like problems about human capital. And I think what's remarkable in Austin is that for her, the education is really important, but it's not the only thing that matters from the point of view of human capital. It's also your moral principles, moral character. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, when you look at how where the economics profession is at this point, in the past couple of decades, we started to realize in economics that moral character, like character in general, this is what we call non-cognitive skills, by the way. So this is very much a I don't know, uh, this is a very mundane name for what are actually like virtues, basically, like your perseverance, self-control, emotional intelligence, and several other socio-emotional skills. And for Austen, these are the most important forms of human capital.
Yeah.
And very often, what we see is that certain characters are introduced, and they are painted as very much well-mannered, cultured, well-educated. But at the end of the day, it turns out that deep down they are, well, not so good. Like, I don't know, Harry Crawford, for example, or Mary Crawford. They are very accomplished, right? Mary Crawford can sing beautifully and play the harp, right? Is it the harp? Yes, it's the harp, right? Yeah.
The harp.
So I mean, and and the Bertram girls, especially. So it's explicitly written down by Austen that they received a very good education. It's just that these non-cognitive things that really matter for including for marital success, these things weren't there, and this is where, like, Fanny is different from them. That for Fanny, the virtue was there, and that's what got its reward at the end of the novel. And all the so-called, like, the bad guys, like Willoughby, Willoughby wasn't that bad, but Wickham, um, and others, uh,
I
they
think
just,
Willoughby's that bad. I think
yeah, Willoughby.
he's a 1 out of 6 morals in my book.
Okay. But they are painted like they are well-mannered people.
He
They
has
are
good
educated.
manners,
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely, but
But the
morally,
deep down, yeah, they just have bad morals. And
that's right.
the thing with that is that it's difficult to figure out how moral the other person is, uh,
Yes.
uh, because and that's where things like signaling comes to the picture, right? That you how good mannered you are, it's kind of that's an instant verification almost, but how good you are as a person is not. And that's a constant theme in Austen's novels.
It is. But I think part of the reason that she does it so well is she's inconsistent. In some places, the morals follow the manners, and there's quite a good deal of parity between, the exterior eligibility of um, a character and their, true moral core. Whereas obviously then you have um, folks on the other side too who are extremely appealing. And then you have both of the opposites. So
Yeah,
what Austen illustrates so beautifully are that, these dimensions are not correlated to each other. That the fortune is basically independent from, how good a person somebody is. There's going to be good people with a lot of money and not so nice people with a lot of money, and the opposite. So it's just a very, very, it's nicely done to with how she starts to disentangle. I mean, what she's really disentangling there is the idea of um, hereditary, I guess, uh, like the justice of hereditary
yeah,
earnings, even if she also, reinforces it at the same time. But I think Anna has her hand
yeah.
up,
Anna has a
so
question, so Anna.
Yeah,
go.
just and apologies once again that I'm not using my video today. I'm literally cooking and it's like just carrots all over my face. So which would be very Austen, by the way. So I wanted to go back, and I think this is a good moment to bring up this idea that I often have with Austen, which is that she's cheating. in the economic sense. And I just want to like hear what you three and maybe the audience think about it. So if you look at, and I'm mostly familiar with Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice when it comes to like mate selection and the various shenanigans that the girls go through until they all are happily married in the end. And I always feel that, you know, for a while, and maybe Emma, so Emma's ending is similar to this. So you are presented with this very realistic process of trade-offs throughout, right? So the information content that the women have access to constantly updates, right? There are always revelations, always new information. Sometimes it's reliable information, sometimes it's not. And we only find out in retrospect through like Deus Ex Machina moments what was real and what wasn't. And so I always feel that in this imperfect information environment, the women are making rational trade-offs basically, and sometimes they are resigned or sometimes they hate the guy or conclude whatsoever, and then basically Austen cheats with love. And it's realistic up to the point where this thing happens, which never happens in real life, where everything falls into place. The guy is perfect, 100%, 1,000,000% in love with you. Like if he was one bit more in love with you, he would like die. And what seemed like a trade-off throughout turns out not to be a trade-off because you won the Jolly Joker. Even like Colonel Brandon, right? Doesn't seem like a Jolly Joker, but then turns out to be a saint, you know, and gives the parakeet to the guy. And so I just wonder what you guys think about this, whether these are real like economic trade-offs, or is it just she's an economist for a while and then the whole system goes out the window in the end in all the three novels that I'm most familiar with.
Well, you have to appease the Jane eyes, right? I mean, but I think that uh, maybe it's cheating, but also once you made your choice, I think it's not then it pays off to think about the other person as being more perfect than he or she actually is. And maybe Austin just realizes that, and I don't know what you guys think.
But it's like running a business, and then you run it as an economy, right? Like an oikos, like it's your household. And then I don't know, one element of the model that unbeknownst to you throughout turns out to like contain $100 million and solves all your problems.
I don't think it's all the problem. So what I will say, Anna, is I think you have a very good point, and what you're probably reacting to is the artifice of the marriage plot and the fact that Austen is using a formula in a sense. And while we can almost think of it as like her microeconomics within versus her like macroeconomics with, you know, with looking at the overarching, you know, storyline and everything. And that I would agree that there is a greater realism in her micro observations than the macro plot occurrences of her books, because they all do work out relatively well. That said, you know, I think it's true. What you're saying is just true of Pride and Prejudice. And Jane Austen herself actually kind of felt weird about Pride and Prejudice. In retrospect, she was like, "This is too light, bright, and sparkling," were the words that she used about it. I don't think it was her favorite of her books, which is interesting. But when you think about Sense and Sensibility, like Marianne really is compromising on Colonel Brandon in the love department. Like she was in love, total, full stop, obsessed with Willoughby. And like the affection that she feels for Colonel Brandon
Like
later
gratitude.
is, yeah, it's not the same It's not
Yeah.
the same thing.
And
I
also
think she does
she
love him,
decides
but
to not
she-
grow up, right?
Yeah.
Like Willoughby would be the wait for her to grow up. And she decides to stay a daughter at least until his death. Because he's so old, he's 35, so clearly he will die very soon, right?
But
And
I
same
think
with
it's
like,
also, yeah.
go ahead, no, go ahead, Peter.
No, I think there's also this again relatively new stuff in economics, endogenizing preferences, and like how you feel about the other person. It may be subject to investment. So like Marianne tries to like or even love Colin and Brandon. I don't know how well it will play out in the
He
long run. We don't know.
subsidizes the other marriage that is a marriage of love, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So she's trying to be more affectionate toward her husband. I think, and that can be a good investment. I mean, if you are stuck with someone who is good in many respects, but not in one respect, maybe you will try to like him even in that respect,
Yeah.
right? I mean, especially when there is no such a thing as divorce, really. I mean, realistically, so you're stuck with the other person. So why not like them? Why not try to like them better? And that can again that can pay off.
It's not one of the novels you mentioned, but I think the 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 whole theory is particularly interesting when you look at Mansfield Park because there's just less separation. While there's immense separation in terms of virtue of Fanny versus pretty much everyone else, there's a lot less separation in terms of like the economics of everyone and like the total status of the men that are in play. And when you think about the uh you know artifice and things just finally working out, like is it really that good for Fanny? I mean, I'm biased, but Edmund is not a particularly, I guess, inspiring hero. Um, and you see in Maria Bertram, she actually does she goes the Willoughby route. She you kind of get both with her, right? Like because she first marries Rushworth, who has 12,000 a year, the only character in Austen confirmed richer than Darcy. And then but she still can't stand him and she still runs off with the Willoughby sort of guy after the fact. And he doesn't marry her after all. He abandons her. She has to kind of like leave society effectively with her tail between her legs. So, one of the things that I've found to be interesting with Mansfield Park, I think operates a little bit differently and than a lot of the other novels, and maybe has a little bit more of the macro level realism to my mind.
I'm not sure if I agree about Fanny and Edmund. I mean, they seem like a good match, though. I mean,
I
I don't
know.
know. Would Fanny have found someone better? I'm not sure.
No, I don't think she would have found someone
So
better. I
so
just think
yeah,
that
clearly
Edmund
that's
is
that.
extremely unappealing to like a modern audience.
I agree, but even Fanny is unappealing to a modern audience.
That Fanny is totally unappealing to a modern audience.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
I
that
mean, both
too.
Fanny and Edmund they are unappealing to modern readers, and
Completely.
that's why people don't like Mansfield Park that much. I love Mansfield Park, but I'm kind of weird. Uh,
I do too, actually, now,
uh,
but I
so
didn't like it when I was younger. What do you think about Mansfield Park, Rohit? Do you like that one or not or are you a hater?
I'm not a hater. It's not my absolute favorite. I think I don't know. You guys kind of talked about it a little bit already. I feel I don't have a huge amount to add into Mansfield Park. I think I don't know. She was trying for um, something new. I feel like, which
I think
is
so too.
I I appreciate that she was trying something new, regardless of the fact that it's not my favorite, if that kind of makes sense. Because
I
it's
do
like,
too.
it's the some of the themes are interesting. There's a bit more focus on sort of colonialism stuff, which is kind of nice. Like I appreciated it. I didn't enjoy it as much as the rest, but that shouldn't take anything away from the novel itself, I think.
But I think what I liked a lot in Mansfield Park is so in Austen it's usually a woman's perspective, in the sense that it's usually the man who turns out to be good or bad in terms of marriageability and the character and so on. But in Mansfield Park, it's also the other way around. Like Edmund is in love with Mary, and Mary turns out, I mean, probably Mary is a much more appealing character to a modern reader than Fanny, right? I mean,
Totally.
she's a bit like Elizabeth Bennet, but like a worse version, like a
Mhm.
less moral version of Elizabeth Bennet.
I mean, it's
But
an ascetic novel in some sense, right? Like Fanny is, yeah, I mean, she's physically pretty frail. She's very rigid. It's not, doesn't seem like a fun person to hang out with.
yeah, that's why Edmund and she are really good match. I mean, you may not like them, but it
Right,
makes
right.
sense that
That's what
they
I'm
end up
saying. Like it
together.
just,
I mean, who should they end up with instead, right? But anyway, what I appreciated is that we go through the process in which Edmund realizes who the real Mary Crawford is. And that to me is unique in Mansfield Park. You don't have the same with the male characters in other novels. So I don't know. As a man in particular, I like that. I liked. Anyway, I mean, I didn't hate Edmund and Fanny as much as I think most people do.
I wouldn't
yeah,
say
it's
I
a,
hate them.
I mean, if you think about like, I don't know, Liz Bennet, like the reason we like her is that she's very, she comes across as a strong character, and she says things. She's very assertive, like she's ironic. Like
It's witty.
witty, you can almost see her as a modern day protagonist somewhere,
Mhm.
which is not true of Fanny at all. I mean, like that's it's a very like stoic character, which is really boring if you think about it from the perspective of like stuff just happens and she endures. It's very Russian.
Yeah,
Okay, but
Russian. That's a
we
good. That was a good
I
way of putting it.
and I can't stop thinking about your sense that Austen cheats. And I have another one. Even in her lightest, brightest, sparkling novel, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet should never have gotten married, right? Like we do get glimpses. They're just never the main event. I'm thinking now too of like the Palmers, right? In Sense and Sensibility. Mr. Palmer, who's just can't stand his horrible
Yeah,
ditzy wife, right? And she's thinks he's so droll, right? When he's, just being straight up rude to her. There are bad matches all over Austen. It's just those are never the matches that she chooses to focus on, which is where, like, again, to the, I guess, the micro macro point, the lens is off when you look at the total population. Like she is disproportionately zooming in and making at the center of her books people, characters that fit into this, artificial and somewhat unrealistic construct. But everything going on around that central artificial plot is just so on the nose and like out of, things that we still um see today. And people, like, I swear to God, I know how many Mrs. Eltons do I know in Georgetown? Like, they are everywhere. These characters are just still all around us. So I don't know. I guess I'm not going to call Austen a cheater. I think I'm going to call her a like a selective uh zoom in person, author.
By the way, you mentioned Mrs. Bennet, and when I think about Pride and Prejudice and like who the underrated characters in Pride and Prejudice are, and I think many people might think, and I agree. I mean, first of all, I mean, Charlotte Lucas might be one of them who are underrated
Oh
because
yeah.
she probably makes a very good choice in marrying Mr. Collins. I mean, it made perfect sense. I mean, she probably wouldn't have found a better husband, and so she's kind of an unsung hero of that novel, heroine of that novel. But the other is who is underrated, somewhat underrated, is Mrs. Bennet. I mean,
Yeah.
Mrs. Bennet actually gets what she wants at the end. She marries off all her daughters to really good. I mean, except for Wickham, but even in that case, I mean,
She
the end
likes him because
result.
he's polite.
I mean, the end result is not so bad because Lydia at least ends up being married and not living in infamy as a single mother, right? So she actually gets what she wants, and I don't see that appreciated enough. That for some reason, this is where Austen, who likes um, to pick on Mrs. Bennet throughout the novel, but at the end of the day, she kind of uh, she doesn't acquit her, but at the same time, she doesn't give her a big punishment, but she kind of lets her off and says, "Okay, but then you get what you want, but you're a horrible character in many ways, but still you don't deserve." I mean, she's merciful toward Mrs. Bennet, I think.
I would argue that what you're saying is true and applicable more broadly, that if virtuous characters disproportionately get, virtuous ends and what they deserve, honestly, a lot of not so virtuous characters get way more than they deserve. Mrs. Bennet gets everything she wants. Willoughby gets Miss Grey's 50,000 pounds. Mr. Collins, there's whole articles written. Someone noted after I sent out my Pride and Prejudice installment that there's a whole host of scholarship that's like, okay, make fun of Mr. Collins all you want, but like his life is set. Like, he got Charlotte Lucas, who's a total catch for him, and he is for her too. Like, that's a great marriage for both of them. And he's gonna inherit Longbourn, yada yada. Like, he has it made in the Shade. So many characters who don't deserve nice things get them anyway. And I think that this is again part of the, I guess, maybe the price that she's willing to pay for letting all the virtuous people win, is that, like, the not so virtuous people do too. And but this
Yeah, but
goes again to the artifice of the
most of
comedy. Go ahead.
well, most of all, like Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Collins, they weren't really bad people. They were stupid, right? And that's probably for Austen. That's probably different, and so she kind of feels for them to some extent. But okay, throughout the novel, we poke fun of them, and then at the end of the day, we kind of let them off the hook,
Yeah, but like
and it's
Willoughby's
kind
a
of fine.
horrible
I mean,
person, and he marries, like, I think the wealthiest heiress in Austen, and Henry
oh yeah,
Crawford
that's the
has
thing.
zero consequences for Henry Crawford's naughty behavior. I mean, I think there's people that Austen would like the Austenian virtue ethics would say this dude is bad and he gets away with basically everything. Why is she more forgiving with men, Anna? Because the world in 1800 to 1815 was way more forgiving to men. I think it's part of it.
I mean, if you think about it as a somewhat rational representation of what the world actually looked like, then it makes sense that she was somewhat forgiving. I don't know. I kind of find the fact that like the right people end up with the right person kind of thing is a satisfying ending, right? I mean, why would you try to subvert the genre when she was writing it? She doesn't need to.
Yeah.
What I was also wondering, like, in trying to prepare my thoughts for this salon, is that I find that Mansfield Park and Emma, to me, are the novels. By the way, these are probably my two favorite Austen novels, and these to be also the novels where if you look carefully throughout the novel, you can probably predict the matching. So it's not that hard to predict the matching, and it's kind of nearly optimal matching from an economic perspective. Like Emma marries Mr. Knightley, and they're both high status. We don't know how much money Mr. Knightley has, but he has a nice estate, and he probably has a lot of money. Emma, we know she's wealthy, so they get married. What we probably don't see, what's probably a surprise is that Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax marry, but even them, they're not. I mean, Frank Churchill is not exactly a virtuous man, and this is again an example where Austen lets someone off the hook uh, who probably shouldn't have been let off the hook. So that's probably a surprise that the ending for Frank Churchill was so good. Uh, but you get the right matches, and also Harriet Smith and
Robert Martin.
Robert Martin, yeah,
Mhm.
Robert Martin gets together. So very realistic. And what I wonder, would in Austen's time, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet actually marry each other? Like that to me is a bit more romantic.
Well, this one I think maybe this will make you feel better, Anna. From my understanding of the period, there was a lot more social tolerance for wealthy men marrying um, less wealthy women. Obviously, they still needed to be of the gentry and everything, but their fortune wasn't so big a deal. Versus, I think there was much more shock and awe around a very wealthy woman marrying not so wealthy a man, which again, you gotta hand it to Willoughby. Clearly, Willoughby was like Jude Law and the talented Mr. Ripley hot. Like he's got to be her hottest guy. There's just no way that an average sort of person would both like bring Marianne to her knees and convince a woman that much richer than him to
Yeah,
marry
but
him.
if you look at in Emma, and again, this is I liked very much, is how Mr. Elton is rebuffed. When he proposes to Emma,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that was not. I mean, Austen was unforgiving for him because just as what you said is that there was a man who was vying too high, right,
Mhm.
and didn't understand his price in the marriage market, right? That's always crucial in these novels. I mean,
Uh, he didn't understand his price, but he had help misunderstanding his price because the reason that he misunderstands his price is because Emma
yeah,
misunderstands Harriet's price
yeah,
and
exactly,
and she has made the identical mistake to him, which is why that is like honestly one of the most brilliant scenes in I think the entire over because their sins are the same and their offense is too.
exactly. And that's why it's such a great novel because you can go through Emma's mistakes. Or I mean, she makes mistakes after mistakes about getting the prices wrong, getting the matching equilibrium wrong, right?
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, Austin does justice is that she actually gets the equilibrium. Like she actually points to us, okay, this is going to be the equilibrium matching. Like it's not like in a fairy tale that Emma paints, that where Harriet Smith could marry Mr. Elton, and of course Emma is not so keen about Mr. Elton marrying her, and she's especially not so keen on Harriet marrying Mr. Knightley, right? So that's when she realizes how wrong she was in mispricing these characters.
Does Austen have like truly sexually deviant women? Or is it always the guy?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, for the era's norms.
Oh yeah, Maria Bertram is
Yeah.
She's a femme fatale, right?
I don't know if she's a femme fatale exactly. She is
But she's sexually deviant in the contemporary sense.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, she's
Mansfield Park, Mary. I mean, is the best example there, right? Like it's kind of
I don't know if
anti-Fanny.
she's a bit French, right? I mean, and I mean that
Yes.
novel is obsessed with the difference between the English and I mean, it's not spelled out very explicitly, but I think all over through that novel is the debates around the French Revolution versus the English way of doing things. And Edmund is the English guy, right? I mean, Edmund is totally English, while Harry Crawford and Mary Crawford are
very French.
Are a bit French.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, I'm fascinated with what you pinged in, Anna, because I think there's a difference between, again, it goes to like the lens of focus. I think that her novels depict the gentry with extreme realism, and they just ignore whole swaths of society, but that doesn't make them unrealistic. It just makes them focused. Honestly, we're talking about groups of people in the gentry who were extremely isolated from the rest of the world and other classes aside from, their own servants. So I don't think it's an unrealistic picture. I just think it's a specific one. What do you guys think?
I didn't
I haven't read Anna's. It's
that.
yeah, Tanya wrote something.
Oh, Tanya, that was from you, Tanya.
Do you want to
not
say
Anna.
more
Sorry.
about that, Tanya?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. No. I mean, I absolutely agree. It wasn't an unrealistic picture. What she painted or what she brought forward did realistically portray the gentry or the class that she was trying to maybe write for or write about. But at the same time, my point is England was not the richest country at that time. There was poverty. There were people living in abject poverty on the streets as well, right? So if you're looking from an economist's perspective or calling Austen's, economic side of the writing of these novels, it did not take the whole spectrum in. Even so say, for example, okay, the gentry. She's talking about the gentry. The scenes are all set in the gentrified locations, but it's not that they would be devoid of servants. There would be servants, but there is never a mention of a servant or some angle about the servants to kind of bring that whole picture in, is what I'm saying.
You know what I would think? I would put a slightly different lens on that. She mentions servants in several places, but they're never developed characters.
Exactly.
They're always right.
Yeah.
They're mentioned, and it's like, I sent my Lady Bertram makes a huge deal of sending her her like hair person to go help Fanny before the ball, right? And she like mentions it 5 times, but this that person is never granted any kind of either real screen time or depth.
Yeah. So that's the point that I was making. And I mean, I love Austen, no shade on her. But if I have to look at what Austen wrote versus a very contemporary series, The Downton Abbey, there is equal representation of the lives of the serving class, along with the earls and the counts and everything, right? And that kind of looks more balanced to me than the novels that I've read about Austen. Sorry, Peter, you were saying something.
I think uh, I would put it this way: Austin was, if we're talking about who is what sort of an economist, Austin was a microeconomist, not so much a macro guy.
Yeah,
Joel,
that
sorry.
makes sense. Yeah.
So she focused on a particular social setting, and trying to understand what's going on among the gentry. And I think she also isn't very much concerned about the professional classes. I mean, there are characters, and yeah, it's kind of more. Yeah, she's more concerned about professionals than the servants, but still, the main focus is on the gentry and how the fortunes of the gentry are changing. I mean, it's very. I mean, to me, it's very interesting. Like it was a time where um, new classes emerged essentially in England. But it was during the Industrial Revolution. Let's not forget that. And she was focusing on the gentry, and I kind of forgive her that, because yeah, she took a more micro perspective, I would say.
It's a very modern notion to have to represent everybody, right? In classical novels, you have like one social strata, right? Like even if you just look at one, one author. I mean, Tanya, you mentioned Dostoevsky in the chat. I mean, each Dostoevsky book really is about a different class. Sometimes there are two classes meeting or clashing, but it's never truly broad. I think it's a modern concept, but I think it's a really important one. And I often wonder what kind of books, I mean, or Netflix series Jane Austen would be writing today. Natasha, what do you think? What would she be writing today? Like White Lotus, but good?
Um, I don't know. Honestly, I think that Tanya had it with Downton Abbey. Like
Yeah, right. That's
the
right.
upstairs half of Downton Abbey is very Austenian in a lot of ways. And I agree with you totally, Anna, that there's a big product of our times that's, we are more interested in upstairs downstairs dynamics than I think Austen was. When she's in it, what she's noticing more of is, her immediate environment. And I think what she captures very well is the fear of downward mobility from the gentry because of these like particular economic rules around succession and entail. And so the other series that I think that I could see Austen writing for would be Succession, because Succession is just such a huge question in the novels, and kind of the corollary, like, why is marriage important? Marriage is important for succession, for the male heir who's going to take on the estate and the next generation.
I think she would make a good Netflix series. I'm not sure which Netflix series she would make. Probably she would make a completely different one from the ones we know and watch. But the essence of her novels can be put into modern perspectives, I think, very easily. Like, for example, property would not be such a big deal in an Austenian uh, Netflix TV series now than it would have been in the early 19th century. Because, again, like referring back to where we started, like for women, property was a very, very peculiar thing, because they couldn't own property after marriage. Obviously, we live in a different world from that perspective. Now, the main form of capital is not land; it's more like human capital. And I think in that perspective, in that sense, having wealth and having good character might go together more easily in the modern setting than in Austin's setting, because then, even if I had a very bad character, but I inherited a bunch of land, I would be a very rich person in Regency England. But if I have a very bad character in terms of these kind of non-cognitive skills that we like to talk about in economics, in the modern world, um, actually those character traits are very important for financial success in contemporary life. So I think that would be an interesting twist for a modern Austinian Netflix show. Um, and I don't know, I would be interested in seeing one, but I think the essence, which is that people try to look out for the best for themselves, for their families, try to look for someone who has the right sort of human capital, like including morals. That didn't change much. So to me, the novels read very modern in that sense.
Do you think it is possible for us to represent the current society with some level of verisimilitude, such that you can actually see similar levels of, I don't know, socioeconomic analysis being incorporated into it? Because when I think about whatever the modern version of the Austinian world would be, they all seem like high fantasy as opposed to anything close to reality. Succession included, very much included.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't particularly see anyone making anything. Even though I think we could do something like that, but maybe the Jane Austens of today are not into making TV series. They are probably doing something else.
Well, I just need my film agent to sell the teleplay to Portrait of Amir. That's really the that's really the ask here, I think.
I mean, the thing is more like, I keep thinking about what might be, and more than just, I think something like Billions might come closest to it, weirdly enough, if you
Mm.
wanted to kind of, because it has actual correct character motivations, although in a very contrived, specific setting. It needs a relatively deep level of industry knowledge to appreciate, which is kind of modern world is more complex, as opposed to sort of the machinations purely in terms of sort of like the markets are different, right? That's more about the work, employment markets as opposed to marriage markets, or like the social mobilities of a very particular stripe, as opposed to sort of a much broader British aristocratic gentry type.
I don't know. I think Billions may have a lot of the same problems as Succession, unless we almost agree with the idea that the domestic that Austen was predominantly in the domestic sphere because that was the main economic sphere in terms of, land ownership and household management versus Billion, Succession. All of these kinds of things take place in
Yeah.
corporations. And yes, there's family dynamics in there too, but the family dynamics are really tightly wound up in and and mirrored in the corporate ones.
In
I mean,
some
yeah,
ways, I think that's,
no, go on.
I was just going to say that, like, I think the reason is it's in both sides. In Austen's world, the professional world, I think, might have been too boring, perhaps in some ways, to demonstrate. I mean, like, land ownership is supremely uninteresting in a TV show, I would imagine, right? Or like in any entertainment format, because like your entire job is to kind of not do anything and have other people run it for you. Merchant ships potentially, venture out whaling and stuff potentially. East India Company would have been really amazing.
I was just gonna say we
Yeah.
have to talk about the East India Company, which
Right.
has there ever been a company that's, I guess, both more represented in art, but also so responsible for the livelihoods of so many, indirectly of so many great, artists and novelists. Anyway.
Yeah. So I think, like, I mean, there's some aspects, but in the modern world, it's almost the flip, because domestic stuff is in some ways, the mores are broken down, so you can't really break taboos, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't even know what that would be like. And I'm trying to think of one that did, and nothing comes to mind. And so the professional world, in a weird way, is where more of these dynamics actually play out. So in some ways, that's the true successor.
Yeah, I mean, what came to my mind is in modern society, like most people work somewhere, right? I mean, they have a job, and the gentry didn't really have a job; they lived off the land. So their domestic life was all they had. Like that was their life. And so we try to analyze like I mean, for example, when I think about what's the price of me going to the movie theater, apart from the movie ticket, well, there's the commuting time, there's the time where I sit in watching the film and so on. This is kind of expressible in terms of my hourly income, for example. But when you are in a gentry society or a gentry family, you don't have that because yes, you have to manage the estate, but even for that, you have people to manage the estate. So really, the shadow price, as we like to say, of one activity is just the opportunity cost of that other activity, which is very hard to quantify, right? I mean, so what I'm about to say is that it's really about some kind of a leisure class in Austen's novels, and it's fundamentally different from the one that we have. Uh, so that to me is one main difference between the corporate plus family world we have today, and the domestic life that was depicted in Austen's novels.
And this is also why, like, I feel, I don't know, just I love reading P.G. Wodehouse because that is much more fantasy, but it is explicitly about the leisure class because it is.
Yeah, sure.
The I will maintain, and I'm gonna ping in one about the leisure class, because the leisure class, and specifically messy rich people, is evergreen source material for novelists. And I can't believe we haven't mentioned him yet, so I'm going to do it now, because the snobs and the high society is the place where Girardian mimetic mechanics are most easily observed, right? And when I say that, what I mean is specifically um, the tendency of human beings to desire what other people desire, that, and specifically nothingness, that, just the idea of wanting to get the triangular form of desire, where you um want something because somebody else wants it.
Yeah, Anna raised her hand. Anna.
Yeah, this is actually, thank you, Natasha, for saying nothingness, because this was on my mind like an hour ago or so, but didn't get to ask. So one other thing about I mean, I don't know how much this is about economics, but it is, in the sense that it is kind of like participation in society, where a lot of the things that the women are trying to do as they are maximizing in these novels is just kind of to continue existing. So not just succession, not just having offspring, obviously those are very, very important. But even in like evolutionary psychology, like self-preservation is first, right? Put on your own mask fast. And I often find that, when the Bennet girls, when Emma are in these dilemmas, and this clearly was Austen's own personal dilemma as well in her life. It's like, if you don't have a husband, or somebody is not courting you, you don't exist. I mean, this is why people keep reading Austen, right? This is like a timeless problem. The Sartrean question of, do I even exist outside the gaze of the other? And I really wonder how, in your views, this relates to the economic concept. Women basically trying not to be proper to themselves, or how would we translate this into economic terms? Or even if you just agree with this statement or not.
I think network social reality is true. I mean, very much from an economics perspective, because expected value in some sense is a function of what you expect to happen later, but also a combination of the intrinsic benefits. So if your perceived value in society is dependent on perception in some sense, as it is, some part of it has to be quantifiable and some part of it is not. And that's where the original concept that we were talking about, like whether virtue or being ethical actually provides you some nous, actually comes into play.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the Austen novels, that that kind of dilemma or that kind of choice for women was a lot more existential, lot more deeply existential than in modern life. I mean, because women didn't, they couldn't inherit land, for example. So, uh, just as we are reminded in Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, so if they didn't find a husband, they might have they could have ended up in deep poverty. So I think that was a very, for that reason, um, I think it's different. It's very much different than in today's society. That to me is, I don't know. I mean, I've never been a woman, so I don't know how women feel about this today. But I think it's fundamentally different from that perspective.
I think it's definitely different. I had somebody ask me, coming out of, I can't even remember which Austen installment, like, do you think that things are better for women today than in Austen's time? And I kind of couldn't believe it. I was like, yeah, things are better. We
Oh
can
my God.
take out a credit card.
Oh
Like,
my God.
yes, obviously things are better. That said,
You were like BRB going for a bloodletting.
yeah, but still, I think that marriage is in modern times more transactional than we would like to admit. That we are often still doing some of these calculations, maybe just not um, so overtly. And people have asked me whether the Austin math model is, could you use it on a contemporary novel? Would it still work out? And my answer has been, and I think it's relevant here, is yes and no. Like, the dimensions are the same. Like, people still care about fortune, morals, manners, and fuckability in their partners. But the Austenian weighting has changed. Like, I don't think morals is first. Fortune's actually probably lower. Manners and especially fuckability is definitely way higher in our time. But there's also, like, there's also more mechanisms to monetize, those other kinds of skills. Like, for instance, Willoughby would probably have been like a model or actor and, been able to have some kind of profession where, people that good looking tend to be wealthy because there's, economic opportunities um, in today's environment that didn't exist to the
Right.
same degree with digital media and everything. So, I think that some of it is these dimensions get conflated, and there's more different paths to fortune. And we see over time that in some ways it's the project of modernity to move from a hereditary economic model to a meritocratic economic model. And the degree to which it succeeded is totally up to debate. But I think that we like the sense that it's less about heritability and more about individual, whether virtue is probably the wrong word because it's not all moral. It's cognitive, it's physical, it's all of the above.
Yeah, and I think you put it very much the right way, that um, we we live off of our human capital now, so we don't live off land, and that's a fundamental difference. That as you said, Willoughby could be a model, could have been a model today, and it's great, right? Because you you have much more scope for specialization. So even if you have a bad character but you are nice looking, you can find a good job. If you are not so nice looking but you have a good character or good skills, again you can find a good job. Now, on the other hand, in the marriage market, these are more closely complements probably. So, I mean, because in the marriage market we don't have that much specialization than in the so-called economic market or whatever economy. So you have to be. I mean, you don't have to be good looking, but it kind of it it, it pays to be good looking, obviously. Whereas you can get a good job even without being very good looking. So how much the level of specialization is somewhat different in the household economy than in the broader market economy. That's how I would put it.
Anna, you have your hand up. Was that from before, maybe?
Oh,
So
my
one
hand.
thing that
Sorry, yeah, sorry, I forgot to.
Oh, no
Oh,
worries.
sorry. I'm just like
Well-
a student with my hands stuck in the air. Sorry about that. No, I hear what you're saying, and this is very interesting.
So what I also
Yeah, it's much better today. I don't even understand how this can come up.
I wrote this down for myself that wanted to talk about this, wanted to bring this up, is the importance of health and health production in Jane Austen's novels. And again, I would quote my favorite parts of this is in Emma, the Mr. Woodhouse's health concerns, and I can very much relate because I'm a hypochondriac. So it's all about my life is all about consulting with my doctors and without me having any problems. and at least Mr. Woodhouse had some actual health problems. But anyway,
Did he?
yeah, I mean he was a bit frail, I think. But okay, he kind of put a great emphasis on his health. Let's put it this way. So
Yeah, but Austin's making fun of him for
yeah,
that.
sure. I mean, but she's making fun of like a lot of people in her
Of
novels.
course. Yeah, she makes fun
So
of
Mr.
everybody, but
Woodhouse is not the worst.
no.
But anyway, and like just to compare like how we produce our health, as we say in economics today, and how they did it in Austen's time is very instructive to me. Actually, a lot of characters are obsessed by this issue. Like, will I get a cold if I go to this ball and I don't dress up properly? I don't know. Is baked apples the healthiest food there is in the world? Right? I mean, and of course, our knowledge was not as advanced back then. So it's interesting to read about all those theories about what will make you, what will or will not make you sick.
This is another one where I wonder how much of this is in the water. Like, that part of what she's doing here is just capturing how people talked about this stuff. Oh, you'll catch your death, so and so. But I mean, she uses it's not just a point of fun. Like both Marianne and Jane Bennett, come down with serious colds, illnesses that,
Harriet Smith
drive the
also.
plot in cases. And, in Marianne's case seems to be very much a psychosomatic, body mind, disorder.
Yeah, also Harriet Smith is another case where it drives the plot. So I don't know. It's also something which is, I mean, it's there. I mean, a lot of novels deal with questions of health, but in Austen's novels, again, this is dealt with as a very in a very practical way. So, in a sense that the everyday decisions are described in Austen in a very practical manner. That it's like a very micro perspective. Did you go out and like, how do I dress up so I don't get a cold? Like, how do things like that. Lisa describes in so much detail that I like. To me, it's really delightful.
Tanya, you have
Tanya,
your hand up.
So to your point, Peter, I think that the point of the era was that obviously health services were abysmal. If you catch a cold, it could lead to death,
yeah,
right? So there was a lot of focus around how to safeguard yourself, because what the hell will you do with 10,000 up to 10,000 pounds a year if you're dead, right? So I think that is something to be also kind of just cognizant of.
exactly. You're exactly right. On the other hand, in modern society, we also put a great emphasis on health, and the reason is there's a great complementarity between surviving different types of diseases. So we care about whether we get cancer because we have a greater chance of surviving cardiovascular diseases if we and infectious diseases and so on. Because if we didn't survive those, we wouldn't care so much about whether we will get cancer when we are 60 or 70-year-olds.
Okay, because Tanya brought up the point about what do you do with 10,000 a year if you're dead, I have to connect this to like the modern billionaire obsession with health, which verges almost on immortality. And I have long been kind of connecting this billionaire focus on health and billionaire focus on AI as two sides to the same coin, both of which being this problem when you're that rich of how do you stay alive? Because 10, $1 billion a year today, 10,000 a year in Austin's time, you're right? And even if our lives are less precarious, we still have lifespans. And I'm curious if part of the obsession with it wasn't just of the time, but again, of the class and it being, the pinnacle of society for whom so much is in store if you can hang around and if there's any connection here to who's the billionaire guy who's like getting infusions of his son's blood and stuff.
Yeah, I don't remember his name.
Peter
But
Thiel.
No, Brian
no,
Johnson,
that's another.
Brian
Brian
Johnson.
Johnson.
It's Brian
Brian
Johnson.
Johnson.
Yeah.
who like electrifies his penis every other week or something. Yeah,
How do you know that?
for him. I'm sure it's pleasant. Sorry, electrocutes, not electrifies. Electrification is actually innovation.
Well, depends.
I didn't hear that. That's crazy.
And by the way, I mean, just to refer back to the quote that I quoted from Sense and Sensibility, like about the annuities, and Austin was aware of that. That the richer you are, the more you want to keep staying alive. I mean,
We're full circle. We're full circle to
exactly.
the annuities. I am
And of course,
curious because you're out there in San Francisco, Rohit, if if any of this is similarly in the water with the tech class out there.
Then what the wanting to live forever?
And the health obsession and
Of
yeah.
course.
Yeah.
I mean, one silly way to think about this might be if you looked at the average tech worker 10 years ago, and if you look at the average tech worker today, they're like, they're not the same people. Because today, like every single person that I know is fairly health obsessed, eats carefully, goes to the gym regularly, lifts, runs, hikes. This was not normal software engineer behavior sort of a decade ago, a decade and a half ago, because you were meant to be, out of shape, hunched over keyboard warriors. That is gone. And part of it is because of this, right? Like you realized, oh, this is another system that comes next that I can hack. And part of that is because once you get rich, then this is one of the things that you do next. And if you think about every single person that you look up to in terms of sort of rich, successful folks, they've all done this. Bezos did this, Zuckerberg did this. Like they've all gone through this trajectory of, okay, now we got to figure out the body.
Also, you make more money, no? I mean, when software engineer was like a
Way more money today than then,
white
yes.
collar job, you have the same problem, right? Like when you make that amount of money, say at Google, or you're a startup founder, really highly funded, or you're a VC, it's kind of worth staying in shape until your 90s.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
life, the quality of life that you can lead is just insane.
Correct.
Well, we've
Yeah, but it's
officially
not just
outlasted our audience.
exactly.
This is
Yeah.
so fun.
This is amazing. Oh my God.
I love this, you
do this
guys.
with? What other author we could do this with?
Oh my gosh.
Is there like
You
another
could-
author we love where we could do like
you
because
could do it with
now I
George
wanna use
Eliot.
this
You
on
could do it with
everything.
the
Or
Middlemarch
Shakespeare. We could
is
do that with Shakespeare.
absolutely ripe asking
Oh
for
my
this,
God,
and
that's
Middlemarch has been going
Middlemarch.
viral, right? Like you have like
And
a
I wanted
whole
to reread it without having to reread it.
you have a whole town economy there, right?
Yeah.
Like you have the doctor, you have the landed folks, you have the reformers, right, who are trying to
Yeah.
change the economic model.
Yeah.
It's, I think that that's a good one. I mean, there's so many.
Can we do that maybe in like July? So to give people
Yeah,
real
I'd
time
be
to
down.
read it.
I'd be
Yeah.
down.
I don't know when I will be free in July. This is because I will be traveling part of July, but I think maybe the second half of July would be
Okay,
great.
let's do that. I do have the book. Maybe it's in my boxes, but I will reorder it and then I will definitely read it. I would love to do it. I would even join in as a fourth host for that.
Ah,
should.
wonderful.
We can do
That
it
would
like
be
The View.
Let's figure it out.
I love it. All right, guys. This was so
All
much
right, guys,
fun.
this was a pleasure.
My cooking is
thank
done.
you
I will
guys.
send you
Bye.
photos.
Ciao, ciao.
Take care.
Bye.